What's up, and welcome back to Beat Goblin. This is on the second channel, not because the Polyend tracker is off topic for the main channel, but because the Polyend tracker is barely in this video, so consider yourself warned. The basic premise is that I want to take a little drop that I made on the tracker, bring it into my DAW, and make it hit, hopefully, much harder. So here's what the original sounds like. And it's fine, and I'll link the making of it on the tracker itself at the end of this video, but I don't think it hits nearly as hard as it could. There are a couple of problems that I'm going to tackle one by one, but the biggest one, I think, is the lack of push and pull. It's implied, but not super present. Basically, a drop like this seems to want to deliver a quick punch, and then haul back, and then punch even harder. That's kind of the way I'm conceptualizing it anyway. And I need all of those different disparate elements to connect and flow into each other. Let me show you what I mean. First, I've added this horn sample at the very beginning. So in context, also notice that I've held back the 808. It doesn't get to come in until the full wall of sound kicks in with the second kick. Now, to fill in that gap. In this case, I'm using a modified serum preset. This right here, with a bit of processing. Bit of reverb. So that kind of gets us our initial push and pull, our call and response, where you have that first hit with that horn stab, you haul back with that wub and that snare hit, and that leads us into this kind of wall of sound where the 808 and vocal sample kick in. Now we need to make that flow a bit better because everything right now feels super disconnected. To make all that stuff connect, the horn, the wub, the vocal sample, and the snare, I've rendered out reverbed versions of most of those things and then reversed them so I can create little lead-ins. So as this horn is playing, for instance, we have a reverse of the wub. So the wub is kind of being led into as the horn is dying out. Over the course of all of this, we have a reversed snare to lead you into that first snare hit. And so that the vocal sample doesn't come out of nowhere, I also have. So altogether, with the growl having its own little lead up, the snare having its own little lead up, and the vocal sample having its own little lead up, we get this. I'm going to take this further in a second, but first let's address the other major problem with the original drop. There's not really a clear focus or a clear driving force. Nothing really stands out that much. It sounds a bit too laid back, and some of the elements sound a little sloppy. You've probably noticed at this point that I'm not using this hi-hat and glitch part. I'm going to use that later in the drop, but for this, I want to really keep this minimal. This, once again, is to emphasize that kind of boom, pull, hit you with the wall of sound with the 808 and the vocal sample. But at this point, if we just isolate the vocal sample and let it really drive the drop, it's not very in your face and a little sloppy. So the eagle-eared among you may have noticed that this sounds a bit different from how it did originally. Kind of almost more like a synth element, which is very deliberate. So here's how we get there. Cut some lows, bit of reverb, and the big thing, this filter. This is a free plugin, by the way. I've got it on a low pass filter. This goes a long way towards both making me able to bring this element really into the forefront, and it cleans it up. It makes the rhythm of it more consistent and cleaner, and makes it kind of hover behind the beat a little bit, which I think really works for this groove. A little bit of OTT on top of that. And some kind of distortion, saturation, drive type stuff. Ducking it to the kick and snare, once again, to really allow it to get pushed into the forefront. Bit more EQ, and now we've got a bit of stereo width from that reverb and a bit more distortion, so this is pushed very much into the forefront. To make the kick punch through even further, I've parallel processed it a bit, because this kick and snare are living on the same track. So in this version, I'm using knock to increase the punch quite a bit, so give it a sharper transient, and then I'm rounding that transient off with a bit of soft clipping. So that kick is allowed to stick out of the mix quite a bit more, which then gets slapped down by the limiter on the master. Also, to further allow the kick to poke through, I have ducked my 808s to the kick. Sidechaining your 808s is usually not a great idea, but in this case, this is much more a case of just increasing the attack on the 808. Once again, so that it's allowed to be pretty loud, but stay out of the way of the main punch of the kick. Now that we've got this kind of section that works, we can start to create variation. So for instance, for like the second half of this drop section, I've swapped out the wub sound, which is kind of fun. And then I have taken this whole sound stack and rendered it out so that it's all just one track. And then I started stacking effects on it. And then this infiltrator preset turns it into this growl thing, which is super fun. I render that out and then cut it off a bit early to kind of shape the little rhythmic thing it's doing, and then add a little bit of reverb as well. So in context, and you'll notice I am allowing the 808 to continue going during this like second half of this section. So basically every 4 bars, the drop kind of fully resets, where you like do that big hit, take out the 808, and then bring everything back with a vengeance, like this, or like this. And then in the middle of that, we do like a kind of a mild reset where the momentum is still kept up, but we have an extra little growl thing. Or there's this monstrosity. And you'll notice I'm also layering this glitch element from the glitch percussion track, and I have removed the 808 here. And then we've got those little octave jumps, which kind of create a bit of interest, but this is Sparta. This is a couple of infiltrator patches. So there's our original that we already know. And then another one here. Adding some distortion, and then I've cut some highs, added a tiny bit of reverb. And that's how we get to our full first section of this drop. I'm not completely sure how I feel about the second section, but I am going to play it for you, and I also have this little lead-in of another little infiltrated bit of the synth just to bring us into the second half of the drop, where I do end up allowing it to be a bit more laid back. So I've brought back the hi-hat and glitch percussion. I've brought in this melody loop that I made. Got some reverb on that. And I've pitched down that main vocal sample an octave and then run it through a bunch of different processing and then just chopped out the good bits. So here's that. It's definitely a little sloppier, but at least it's interesting, hopefully. And that's how we take a drop from just okay to a little bit more exciting. If you'd like to see the making of the original on the Polyend tracker, you can check out this video up over here. And if you'd like to see more drop production, you can check out this video down over here for something a bit dubsteppier. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit. Okay, so then we'll go into the walkthrough. There go my headphones.